Well, it's not just. I wish it was. I wish it was just me who's going to be introducing Jim and Wayne. But let's take just a quick step back. We actually have a few other folks on this call that are part of the Microsoft team that support the various branches throughout the DoD. And as you can see, we actually got Wayne. Wayne's on camera here, but we've got Andrew Ventresca and Zach Yersley. Y'all want to come off mute and say hey real quick, guys?
Yeah, I'll jump in there real quick. Thanks, Stephen. Great to be here today. I'm really excited about this session. We've got a lot of requests on this particular topic, and we got two of the best here with Jim and Wayne to kind of walk through this. So looking forward to it. Real quick, Andrew Ventresca. I'm an Azure specialist for the DoD Microsoft team, and I focus on Department of Navy for all things Azure data and AI. Go ahead, Zach.
Hi, team. I'm Andrew's counterpart on the West Coast, so I cover the Department of the Navy and Marine Corps as well as Indo-PACOM, and look forward to the session. If there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Thanks.
I appreciate that. Wayne, keep you waiting in the wings here just a few minutes before we intro you and Jim, if that sounds good. So what we have here is today is a live session, but it's also going to be interactive. There's going to be a recording, so if you're listening to this on the recording, if you go back and check within the show notes, or if you go back and check within your email invite, there's actually going to be a form for you to be able to submit a question. At the end of this call, what we're going to do is we're actually going to put the email contact information for today's speakers, but then also we're going to show a slide here in just a second of your entire DoD team here at Microsoft that supports your respective military, your respective branch. So actually, that's what I'm going to do next. So Andrew, I will share this screen here, and as you can see, we have your data and AI team. So you can see Zach and Andrew here. And the whole thought process behind speed dataing was to open up an informal line of communication for the Microsoft product specialists that support the respective DoD, and you can see your team here, and really get a lot of questions answered relative to your cloud objectives, your cloud projects that you have going on. The speed dating sessions that we've done in the past, we actually have a few of them here that are listed. We've had a tactical machine learning, data pipeline operations call that was last month. Had a bunch of engagement relative to AI and ML pipelines with one of our other specialists. His name is John Dotson. So there's recordings of those that you can go back to and check out at a previous time. If that's something that you're interested in, go ahead and type in the chat. Let us know, and we'll get you video links to those. As well as some upcoming ones that we have coming up. In January, we're actually going to be hosting a partner on the call. They are, without getting into the weeds about what it is that they do, when you think of generative AI and the application within the context of DoD, whether it be video or surveillance, object detection, et cetera, that's going to be one that you're going to want to take some time and visit. Obviously, within the context of cloud, you have to factor in security and how your organization deploys solutions. So, in conjunction, we're partnering with the security community here at Microsoft. So we're going to be doing some things with them in February. And what you don't see here in terms of past sessions are some Azure OpenAI sessions that we've done. We've also done the cognitive services and minted solutions. We've actually gone into quite a few of SQL database migrations. Zach did a great job a couple months ago of talking through a use case where we actually had the SQL licenses and renewals of that. So if you have questions, Zach is your man relative to that particular topic. All right. So with that, I am going to ask Andrew, could you real quick lay out, I'm going to jump to the next slide here, but I want you to jump into real quick about what the interest behind an ADS is and how an ADS isn't necessarily always just an Azure design session, it's an architecture design session. So some people have called it different things, but can you just real quick set the table on what today's topic is real quick.
Yeah, no, certainly happy to do that. And real quick, I know we have a bunch of different folks on the call. Originally the focus of this community was DoD, but it really does touch broadly across the whole federal landscape, some of our federal civilian agencies, right? So I just want everyone to make sure that this is the right place and there's something for you as well, right? So just to lay that groundwork. And yes, so today's topic, like I said, I think is just really foundational to our approach of how we kind of help mission owners and folks within the DoD and across federal adopt cloud, right? And we call it an Azure design session. People call it many different things: architectural design session, a technical requirements sync, a technical project plan, and it's kind of all of that. But it's our way to bring the right parties together that are involved in a cloud project from the customer perspective, right? And really, we want to come out of that this session with that Azure design session with a pretty good high-level idea of what we're trying to accomplish with a design, costing information, and really buy-in from all the parties, right, that need to be invested to make this cloud project successful. So that's really what we're kind of going to cover today. Like Stephen mentioned, right? Questions are welcome and encouraged now, or filling out your form, and we can get those answered later on. So looking forward to today, and I'll turn it back over to Stephen.
Yeah, fantastic. So when it comes to this particular topic, we started ideating about how practically does this get laid out. If you're on this call, you were invited by either somebody directly from Microsoft or somebody from Caresoft who tapped you on the shoulder or sent you a social media post or an email. And after conversations with y'all, the implementation of your solution or the implementation of our platform tools for your respective solution to support the DoD, it's a iterative process. So it's not just a single event. And so the characteristics of this particular topic, they came up when we started talking about, all right, well, how can we support the mission and help folks know that there are avenues of support that exist within Microsoft and other areas of the DoD. And so I think it's important to call out that we're going to try to equip you best we can with information today. The objective would be at the end of the call, how can you access some of the folks who are on this call for your respective commands, and know that it could be more than one. There's various people that are going to be involved in the whole process with regards to your cloud project. So this is not necessarily going to be as prescriptive. Just know that process, the two folks who are going to be presenting today, Jim and Wayne to be specific, they've done this so many times that their structure and their context that they're going to be able to provide for you today, that's only going to help you be more prepared for your respective project. And then in addition to that, that'll help you save some time. And in the end, it'll actually save resources that can be dedicated to your project. So with that, I almost feel like, Zach, nothing you want to say? No, he's already off camera. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition over to introing Jim Strang and Wayne Meyer. Jim, if you want to come off mute real quick and say hey, and Wayne, and just introduce yourself, just real quick, just what you do at Microsoft, who you support, and just a little bit background on you, that'd be fantastic. Jim, we'll go to you first.
Hey, yeah, good to meet everybody here. My name is Jim. I am an Azure solution specialist, which means that I work a ton with customers that want to go to the cloud, and I help them find out the things that they want to do and map those things to what we can do in the cloud and figure out how to get them there. My patch is the Army. I work a lot with the enterprise side of the Army, so a lot of things that would touch tech across the entire Army. And I used to be a software developer turned cloud architect, and now I'm more on the solutioning side. So kind of seen it all. And yeah, just happy to help and happy to talk to you guys today. So over to you, Wayne.
Hey, thanks. Well, Wayne, kind of been at Microsoft for fairly long time, almost 2 decades. I support the Navy, mostly focused around infrastructure work. Been involved in Azure right from kind of the inception. So been involved with a number of projects. I do a little bit of dev, bit of coding, bit of infrastructure, a lot of infrastructure work, many customer conversations, and have had multiple different types of roles in Microsoft in different locations around the world. So looking forward to kind of having this conversation, share some of the experience that we've had around doing ADA sessions and some of the conversations that get had.
Fantastic. So Wayne, is it consistent then, based off your experience, for folks to call it a bunch of different things? And we call it an architecture design session. We've heard it. We talked yesterday. We're like, oh no, it's more of a technical sync. It's this. It's actually an Azure design session. But oh, what happens if they're not? So it's kind of fun to hear it. That ideation of what they're called. But you've heard it called a bunch of different things. With that, let's kind of go over to the next slide, which you had placed in the deck, but there's a reason why you did. So I'm interested if you could set the table here of what the expectation is. You know, if we're talking to a prospective customer about a cloud project, put some color to this slide here about why it's important.
Yeah, I'll just kind of comment on the first thing that you said. Is like, it's just what's in a name, right? We can call it whatever we want. I think the outcomes are important, and I think that's the key thing that we want to get out of these conversations with customers. You'll see that there's this line that I put in right at the top, which, you know, I tend to throw around with customers a lot, but cloud is a model, not a place. And a lot of the times we embark on some of these conversations where customers are just thinking about, you know, using the big hypervisor in the sky. What is the destination that I want to kind of put towards, versus thinking about, hey, as I'm taking an application or a workload or a series of workloads and I'm thinking about what they would look like in the cloud, there is a different design point, and there are different ways that we approach some of these conversations. And I'll talk a little bit about what some of those things, you know, what drives some of those conversations. But I think as a starting point, I would say, you know, really we want to think about cloud as a different model. There is a once in a kind of generational shift in terms of technology and computing that gives us the opportunity to rethink how we can actually build out these applications. And can we think about, you know, deconstructing and decomposing some of these monolithic applications that we've had in the past? Can we think about putting them into, you know, smaller microservices? Can we think about a different way of being able to architect? And so that cloud model really does open itself up to really reviewing and really rethinking some of these applications. Now, with that, it also brings in different operating models, different ways of us being able to kind of manage and operate and kind of look at, you know, who's actually going to be doing some of this work. There are different constructs that we look at in terms of where these applications reside. And so as we start to think about things like in the DoD, you know, you're going to have different brokers, or in kind of the Navy, different kind of what we call NTAs, Naval Technical Authorities, that effectively are brokers that we need to go and operate with. And when we start to operate in these different environments, that has an impact on how we build. It also has a whole bunch of benefits on how we architect and how we put things in place. So as I typically engage in some of these architectures and these design sessions, is really thinking about where are we going with these, you know, where are we going to be putting these applications? What is the model that we're thinking about? How are customers trying to reimagine what these applications could look like? And then we're going to take it through into some of these motivations and outcomes and business objectives. I've been involved over the last number of years of building out a series of documentation that we have within our Learn platform, which is the Cloud Adoption Framework. And the Cloud Adoption Framework really starts off by, hey, what is your strategy and what is your plan? And that strategy really kind of sets down onto motivations and outcomes. As we think about some of these motivations and some of the drivers, they have an impact on how we approach specific projects. You may have heard about the Gartner 5 Rs, whether we're rehosting, refactoring, re-architecting, rebuilding, replacing. These are some of the first conversations that we end up having in architecture design sessions. How are we thinking about these applications, and what are the motivations that are driving us? So for an example, if my motivation is that I need to get out of my data center because it's shutting down in the next 2 months, well, it's unlikely that I'm going to have the opportunity to go ahead and rebuild an application. I may be thinking about a rehosting. strategy. I may be thinking about a replacement strategy, whereas, hey, am I moving this to a SaaS-based model of something that's currently off the shelf, or do I have to go ahead and just take these virtual machines that I've got running on premise today, based on the time factor, I'm going to go and rehost. I may have the ability or the runway to think about refactoring some of these applications as well. And so, example, I might move from a VM-based environment to kind of a container-based environment. One of the things that we see as kind of being, the big value add around going to cloud is, can we re-architect these applications? But that does bring, there is a time factor in that. There is a workload factor involved. But as we start to re-architect some of these applications and start to think about what they would look like in a cloud context, here we get the opportunity to start looking at, hey, can we move towards more kind of platform-based services? Can we move away from infrastructure, which would require us to STIG, manage, maintain, update, and patch, which is an additional level of work, versus going on and using a service that is native to a platform that has already got kind of provisional ATOs and already got authorization to run, where you might be able to get inheritance from the broker that you're involved in. And so I think these things go hand in hand as part of that conversation, which is, a lot of the times we want to jump into the tech and just start having, conversations around the widgets, but there are requirements to understand, hey, what are those motivations and those outcomes, and then how do we measure the impact and the performance around some of those conversations.
Wayne,
so making sure that go ahead.
Stephen here. I've got to interrupt you only just because what you're sharing is immensely valuable when it comes to orienting the expectations on the front end of one of these discussions. The nuance of DoD carries with it each respective department of the military has their process, their ATO or IATT process. However, knowing that that's going to eventually come up in this discussion, at what level, if somebody's just getting into an ideation phase where they're still kind of whiteboarding what the future state may look like, what role does that play, and timing? When should that come up if somebody's going through the process of evaluating, spending time in an ADS?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great topic, and it comes up every single time. Like, hey, I try to avoid the ATO IATT conversation as much as possible, because we want to use the ADS session as that approach to ideate. What is possible, and what is it that we could potentially achieve? There's a lot of times in these sessions where people that have been building these applications may have been embedded with them for 10, 20 years. And so you kind of get to a point where hey, this is my application, this is what needs to be done, where you're not seeing kind of what the other possibilities are and what are some of the new technologies. So for example, if I take, in Azure today, we have over 1,000+ services that could potentially be leveraged from by a mission owner or somebody coming in. And there's multiple ways to architect and design things. And so what you want to do is you want to try to get to that point of ideating where it says, hey, can we really think about cloud first, cloud native? Can we build a solution that actually meets the requirements and the outcomes? And then down the road, we have that ATO conversation, because I've seen projects and I've been involved in projects where we've had the ATO conversation up front, and that totally derails any of that future state of where we could possibly be, because there's all the what ifs that are being thrown up before actually even getting to a point where we can ideate and kind of really lock in on a gold standard architecture for cloud. And I'll go back to the kind of comment that I made earlier. This is a change that we have, and an opportunity to change the way that we've actually been building these applications. As we've built applications 20 years ago, they're vastly different to what we're able to build moving forward. And so I think being able to delay that conversation to later on in the cycle really frees us up to get to a point where we can get the best out of what we want from that cloud-based solution.
I mean, it's absolutely a factor. The timing, to your point, the timing of that particular conversation, it may not necessarily be as appropriate in the context of an ADS until you've had that ideation, just because of that point that you landed on there, relative to building applications 20 years ago versus building applications in the cloud and that capability now. So, Jim, I don't want to stop. I don't want to pivot over to the next slide with Jim here, but I think it's important to get some perspective, because you support a different set of customers than maybe Jim does. Jim covers down in the Army, and you cover the Navy. But where are there similarities, Jim? Do you have an opinion about kind of what some of Wayne has touched on relative to setting expectations for an ADS?
Yeah, the thing that's that's similar across all of the different MILDEPs is that we still have to follow policies set by the DoD. So what DISA says that you have to do in the SRG, the different types of networks that exist out there, how you connect to those networks, those are all common things. Sure, there might be some local policy that's different. The brokerages, the flank speeds and Cloud Ones of the world may be a little different, have different policies and whatnot, but largely we do all have to follow the same rules. So even if you're somebody on the phone who's not Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever, a lot of what we're going to talk about is still going to apply.
Fantastic. Wayne, I conveniently interrupted you right in the mid-thought, so go ahead and get back to what you're saying before we toss it over to Jim.
The conversation is good, and I think this is where we, this is exactly what we see in an ADS, right? Very rarely do you stand up there with 110 slides and kind of walk through slide by slide by slide. These conversations are dynamic, and they take you on these various paths based on these motivations and these drivers, and kind of then there's technology aspects that get thrown in. And I think ultimately they all build on themselves to kind of get to a point where you actually have you're able to level set. And I think Jim is absolutely spot on. Like there are common rules that need to be that will be applied. And so we bring those conversations in at the right points in time. I think the other thing that as we kind of lock on some of these approaches and this on how we're going to be taking these applications forward, it's really it's really our ability to get the customers to kind of to imagine and ideate. And so what we're seeing is what can we do to accelerate these projects? What are some of the newer capabilities and services that can be thrown in? And then understanding how that's going to interface with a specific cloud broker. A lot of the times, when you're coming from a specific project, which might be based on your particular network or an accepted network, what would this look like in a cloud environment? And how do we interface with those cloud brokers? Who has responsibility? And I think being able to really kind of clarify that R&R is important. So today, whilst I may have the ability to go and actually create user accounts because I'm running my own kind of mini Azure Active Directory, or I might be able to go and assign something, create network routes and UDRs and so on. As I get into a cloud environment, the broker may turn around and say, actually, what, we're going to eliminate or prevent any of those types of capabilities because we're running towards some sort of zero trust architecture, which says we're not going to allow you to create or to do tenant-based functions, or we're not going to enable you to do things like networking, but you are fully empowered to go and actually create your applications, but you're just interfacing and leveraging some of these common or shared services. And I think having those conversations as well exactly, level sets with the customer on what that architecture may look like.
Wayne, just real quick, there's a couple of people who've joined since we've started here, and they may not necessarily be as privy to the forums chat. So welcome for those of you who are just joining, and those of you who are listening on the recorded side. If you have questions, we're going to submit we have a chat, or excuse me, a link to share in the chat, and then we'll get you the links afterwards as well. If you have a kind of a post follow-up question, go ahead and submit your questions there. That way you can ask a specific question to both Wayne and Jim. Didn't mean to interrupt you, but wanted to call that out since we've had a few folks join here. So go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, all good. I think I'll just kind of make one last comment on that ideation. There are some amazing services that we have in Azure today that where mission owners can leverage in terms of re-architecting and rethinking workflow, ingestion of data, in terms of analysis of data. And I think you'll see some of these other kind of sessions that you guys have been running, where it kind of exposes some of the technical aspects. And I think really getting customers to see some of those in action, where I personally prefer doing kind of demos and showing some of the stuff off, because I think it opens up an aperture that a customer can actually then start to understand how these things get utilized. I think as the third big kind of part of the conversation around an ADS is really about how do we now start to break down some of this level of work that needs to be done. So, you know, in days gone by, you know, it would very much be a waterfall style approach. You know, hey, I've got to go and provision a piece of hardware, 3 months of that has to then get put into a rack, that has to then get, you know, kind of various approvals and so on. And then, you know, we get the rights to do it. And, you know, 4, 5, 6 months maybe down the line, we're actually ready to start kind of building and architecting and so on. The cloud really kind of accelerates a bunch of this where, you know, there are in the enterprise or the broad platform is already established. And then I think the onboarding into that environment is significantly faster than we've seen in the past. It also gives us the ability to start breaking some of these projects down into these micro components that individuals can work in parallel. And so part of the ADS really helps, you know, we start to have this conversation around the roles and responsibilities as to who's going to be the one that's actually going to go and start building various elements. So you've gone through the level set, you've understood the motivations and drivers. We've taken an approach to say, hey, we're going to be either rehosting, refactoring, re-architecting. Here's roughly what this architecture may look like, where we've started to ideate and we've started to whiteboard and put it out. And then ultimately, hey, let's start thinking a little bit about who's going to take responsibility of these specific pieces of work. So what are the horizons we're working towards, or the spirals that we're working on? Do we understand kind of how do we come back and, you know, do these rapid fire demos and show some progress in these weekly sprints? And I think that is, you know, from a cloud point of view, is the cloud way. It's just really this rapid velocity, moving quickly, being able to share some improvements, and then, you know, kind of take that and kind of move on to the next piece. And that these principles of rapid based build outs are really important. The last part of this, and kind of some common conversations that I have on a regular basis, is one, show me how it's done. Let's see what you've done in the past. And that's really these product demos, right? Interactive sandboxes. Let's kind of build it out, you know, whilst we're all together, so you can kind of see the simplicity of that build out, but also what the potential output could look like. Conversations around migration versus modernization, those are really big conversations, and ones that are totally aligned to those motivations and drivers. Am I going to be picking something up and just moving it because of the time base, or am I really trying to think about how I modernize that application? Security is a constant topic that comes up. So, hey, as I'm moving into the cloud, how do I secure that? What is my responsibility as a mission owner or as somebody that's building in the cloud versus what is the responsibility of the broker? And I think we're acutely aware of the importance of building secure solutions. And I think, you know, this is taken, but not just from the application we're moving, but also right down into the platform that has been built to support those applications. And so, you know, talking through things like zero trust architecture principles, making sure that we have the right SMEs in place to be able to support those conversations and meeting customers from, hey, how do you authenticate? Or what happens in the case of guest access? Or, hey, how do I just make sure that this particular solution that I'm putting out there may not be exposed to kind of public internet? It's only kind of connected to a specific network that we define. And then the last kind of topic that I'd raise here is team structure and skills to move forward. There are some really interesting, really interesting conversations that we have there, because cloud does upend the way that we operate and the way that we the way that we build, from billing conversations to, you know, operating and managing and, you know, and supporting, to those people that are actually building and architecting. They may need a separate set of skills. And so with that, you know, Microsoft has got things like our Enterprise Skills Initiative. We've got our Learn platform on Microsoft.com. There's some free training that can be done. But I think a lot of that, where we've actually invested in making sure that customers and mission owners actually understand where to go and get skilled. I think having those conversations and mapping out what we believe are the core skills of a particular architecture that are required by specific individuals is an important part of that conversation as we start to move forward. Then,
understood.
You know,
Wayne.
And then lastly, one last point
Go
before I make, we'll have the architecture, and on the back end of the architecture, usually as a kind of Azure specialist or working with various counterparts in the Microsoft side, will then help cost these things out for customers to understand, hey, what would this roughly kind of look to run on a monthly basis? And we would use things like our Azure pricing calculator and so on to be able to kind of cost that out.
That's very succinct. I appreciate you going through. So if you go back and you're listening over the last 15, 20 minutes or so, each one of those different characteristics involve somebody who owns at least an element of that whenever you go deploy. And that's what whenever you're going to have this ideation discussion before you deploy. And you touched on something that Jim and I, as we were developing some of the content for this particular series, that we felt like would be good because we want to talk about the outcomes. And I think you started some of the explanation, Wayne, with a very clear objective, and that is, what are the outcomes that we can expect? And there's a scenario. Jim, I can get into the details of it a little bit, unless you want to set the table about how a platform as a service architecture was paramount to the solution for a particular customer. We don't necessarily need to get into the weeds of who it was here, but when that happened, they went through the entire project plan. They started the process of executing, and they had to pivot. They had to go actually back to a containerized approach versus a platform as a service approach. And there was a reason for that. You actually shared with me as we were talking, Jim, about why some of that was. So I'll kick it over to you in terms of the consideration and why something like identity matters whenever you're having these sessions.
Yeah. So one thing that there's a couple of things that I like folks to keep in mind when they're going into architecture design sessions. So you might think that something like this is like, oh, we're just going to talk about, what cool tech exists out there, what the latest whiz-bang thing from Microsoft is, and how do we use it. Often, unfortunately, we got to get into the weeds about plumbing, essentially, to figure out what paths we can go down from the technical perspective. In the DoD, one of those is almost always networking. It's what DoD network do I need to publish my workload onto? Does my workload need to be accessible from the internet? Does it need to be blocked from the internet? Do I need to reach into a DoD network from my application to query a database that sits on Nipper or Sipper or a DRAN or some other DoD network that exists out there? That allows us to kind of like take the whole menu of what's available and start narrowing it down to something that can actually work based upon the requirements. So, for example, it's like you might come to us and say, hey, Microsoft, I've got a .NET SQL application that needs to be published onto Nipper and also be accessible from the internet. And I would say, great, that leads us down, a couple layers down in the menu of what we can do. So we know that we need to use Azure Government. We need to know that we need to have an express route that connects to a Nipper BCAP. We need to know that we need to have a firewall and all these certain STIGs and everything else. And that allows us to kind of like zero in on an actual technical solution that we can go and implement. Another big one that we run into is identity. And identity is another very boring topic, but it is incredibly important and at the center of almost everything that we discuss. And that's, how do you want end users authenticating with your application? Is it just Army users? Is it just Navy users? Do all of the users have a CAC? Do you need to support users that don't have CACs? Like military spouses. And the conversation around identity, either what's available to you is either being provided to you, or what you can bring to that application also allows us to narrow in on certain technologies. And again, I know those, networking identity might seem like, kind of boring, mundane, type of stuff, but, for better or worse, they are critical to us zeroing in on actual technology solutions. Yeah, so another thing that you might think is interesting is like, okay, we want to talk about tech in an architecture design session and actually, get down to the meat and bones, put it all on a whiteboard and talk about, hey, what is the actual technical solution we're going to be trying to implement here? So you might think that you might just need developers or administrators that, are familiar with the application or workload or whatever, but it's actually a little bit, in my experience, a little bit more complicated than that. If you just get, as one myself, if you just get a room of tech people, sitting around a desk together, you're going to come up with an excellent solution, but it may not meet the business objectives of that actual application. in my experience, it's absolutely critical that you have the mission owner, application owner, and folks who care about the business logic side of that application in an architecture design session. Because technical folks, they might, go down a huge rabbit hole trying to solve some problem, and the business person may say, hey, that's not actually that important. We can live without that, or vice versa. You also really need to have folks who care about the actual money of the thing in the room with you. So, we can architect a Cadillac, we can architect a 1997 Toyota Camry, anything in between. And the finance folks really need to be there to tell us, okay, well, what are those trade-offs? What are those inflection points of, how cool can we get on the tech? How fast can we make it? What are the requirements for failover and DR and high availability and stuff? And there's always an inflection point we got to get to where the cost of the thing actually makes sense for the capabilities that are being provided. And then lastly, the compliance and accreditation owners, the folks, especially in the DoD, who are going to be responsible for EMAS and RMF. Some of the technical decisions that get made during an architecture design session can impact the risk posture of the application that gets deployed out there. So they also need to have a voice in all of this. So yeah, and then lastly is the technical people. We all need to be here too. So between those four main categories, those are the types of people that I would want to have in an architecture design session.
And Wayne, you had touched, Jim, thank you for that. That's it's very helpful to understand that who are all the right folks in the room. In the use case, in this scenario that I had discussed earlier about a proposed architecture, essentially an approved architecture, an approved plan, an implementation plan pivoted to somebody needing to change altogether. And obviously there's branch specific compliance loopholes or policy that you have to take in consideration as well. So before we move on, Zach, you got a question? What's going on, bud?
Yeah, I just was going to say overall, from just a level set from the architectural design session, I know this sounds like a lot, and it is because it is, but just to let you know that there's a whole host of support, both in terms of documentation and Microsoft personnel, as well as CSAMs and other organizations that are here to help you along that process. So understanding that, one, you're not in this alone, and that there is a well-documented process on how to be able to go about conducting this in a well-architected way that reduces risk and accomplishes your goals, I think is incredibly important to level set. So there is a lot of this is explaining a way of thinking, but specifically how we go about doing that, there is a specific well-defined process that Wayne posted about in the cloud adoption framework. And then furthermore, as we start, starting from the very high level, as we started getting down into getting down into the weeds, and we start, breaking apart the ones and zeros, that is where we're going to get really into the meat and potatoes of it all.
So when it comes to that well-defined process, Andrew, there's nuances associated with how Flink Speed differentiates itself from from Cloud One versus ECMA. And just real quick, Jim, if you could just walk through, when somebody is about ready to go through the ECMA onboarding process, can you draw some correlation or some similarities between somebody who's going through the ADS and how that would impact them going through the ECMA onboarding process, just real quick?
You're muted, sir.
Thank you. Blabbing on over here. Yeah, so thank you. So there's two major things that I would keep in mind here is that every single one of these cloud brokerages, or whatever you want to call them, shared services providers, almost all of them are going to want to see what your architecture looks like before they hand you the keys and tell you that, hey, it's cool to go start building your workload in our shared environments. So it's good to do an architecture design session with folks like us from Microsoft, because we know what the constraints and requirements are of all of these different cloud brokerages. So, for example, C-Army is a bring your own identity party. So you can You can use EAMS, you can bring your own Active Directory, you can bring your own ADFS, you can bring your own Azure AD, it doesn't matter. But as far as I know, Cloud One, they've got a centralized identity that they really want you to use. So decisions like things like that can help you narrow in on an architecture just knowing what environment your cloud workload is going to be hosted in, which is something that they're going to want you to do anyway. So you might as well get it done early and get the ones and zeros drawn out on the whiteboard and actually build that Visio diagram.
Does that mean you want me to switch forward to the slide so we can actually have those all out there, Jim, or do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right, I will do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is also kind of what we were talking about before on this slide of like another consideration. There's a lot of considerations. I'm going to get "it depends" tattooed on my forehead one of these days. This slide is really just kind of an overview of what cloud do I pick. You might think, hey, Microsoft's the cloud or Azure's the cloud. It's Microsoft. We like to make it a little more complicated than that. We have 4 major cloud offerings just for IaaS and PaaS that are available to users in the DoD. Starting on the left, we're talking about Azure Commercial, which is accredited at FedRAMP High, Impact Level 2. This is the Azure that everyone else besides us lucky DoD and federal folks get to use. It is often the environment that gets the cool widgets and whiz-bang things sooner than some of the other clouds. So if your workload has a requirement for only Impact Level 2, this is a great cloud to put it in because you're going to get access to the latest and greatest stuff almost right away. Moving up the stack over to the right, Azure Government. This is what a lot of folks in the DoD use today because it's accredited up to Impact Level 5. So it's allowed to be connected to NIPR, and it's allowed to host national security systems because of that Impact Level 5 accreditation. And there's some nuances in the distinction between Impact Level 4 and 5 when it comes to defining an architecture too. There's certain requirements that DISA wants you to do, especially for Impact Level 5, to isolate yourself from other customers in the cloud. So that's another consideration we've got to work out in front of a whiteboard. Moving up the stack over here, we got Impact Level 6. That's Azure Secret. That would be if you wanted to connect your workload to the CIPRNet. And then all the way over on the right, that's Top Secret. That's connected to JWICS, and it's kind of more of an intelligence community thing, but some folks in the DoD end up needing to use that cloud as well.
Fantastic. Jim, hey, listen, we're going to have some questions pop up in the chat for some of the folks who are on the call. So Kyla, go ahead and deploy those. We're going to cycle through some of these particular questions. And, oh, that's a tricky one. I almost answered incorrectly. That must have been you that came up with that one, Andrew.
Oh, let's not go there.
Okay, got it. All right, here we go. So, Wayne, if folks have been paying attention in the chat, I think it's important for the folks who are either listening on a recorded line or actually going back through these resources that you're sharing. Help us understand why these particular resources are valuable to help set the table on what would be, what I would call the success criteria of an ADS. Before you do that, we got another question. So Kyla will answer question 2, and then Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've dropped a couple of things in the IAM window just because I think as the conversation's been going, I think a lot of the times I get these questions like, hey, which services are available? And so as Jim was going through kind of the IL2, 4, 5, 6, I think customers want to know, what is available and what has been accredited at which particular level. And so we've actually done a bunch of this documentation. I think it gives customers actually a bit of a pre-read as we go into these ADSs so that I think we're all on the same page. There is some official sources around, hey, as you're going to go and deploy something in IL4, or you need to deploy to IL5, what are the differences? I think as from an Azure point of view, we have got multiple regions. So our DoD regions were strictly IL5. Our government regions are IL4 or 5. And I think as Jim was alluding to, you can deploy things into an IL4 concept on shared hardware. Or if I needed to kind of have a virtual machine or an app service deployed into IL5, well, then I either need to do that as a dedicated host or as an app service environment, as an example, right? And so or if I was doing something around kind of SQL managed instance, if I wanted to do that in IL5, I need to make sure that I have customer managed keys. So there are some of these nuances that crop up, and I think having these conversations up front, like, do I really need to have this is this really IL5 or is this actually IL4 data? I think it's important to know as we coming in, and so, the last link that I've put in there really kind of outlines, some of the Azure isolation requirements, and what are some of the nuances that you can think through as we make those decisions. And then, I think the adoption framework really is our opinionated view as to how customers should be adopting. We actually went ahead and built out an entire DoD scenario, because there are nuances around DoD which doesn't align to kind of commercial. And so the adoption framework, strategy, plan, ready, adopt, like these are, a lot of that is kind of commercial aspect and commercial language, and can apply. But we then took that and we said, hey, can we double click onto what this means from a DoD point of view or a defense point of view, and let's start to unpack what that would look like. And so we built specific content around identity, specific content around brokerages, how they and the cloud broker and how they interact with our with your mission owners. So I think just having some of that data and at least knowing that information is out there and that we're thinking through it, I think is important that you can kind of use them as reference guides. I put the well-architected framework in there because Zach made mention to the word, he mentioned well-architected, and I think, the adoption framework helps us get on board. But then as we've built these applications, we've also got frameworks that customers can continue to use to make sure that their applications are continually evolving, and being enhanced to make sure that we're meeting the latest requirements. So whether we're optimizing, whether we're from a cost point of view, optimizing around performance, reviewing security, making sure that we are kind of thinking about how do we move towards more of a kind of infrastructure as code-based model. The well-architected framework will actually help kind of frame you and actually move you down that path as well. And then we've got technology in Azure to support some of those conversations.
Yeah, and as to add on to what Wayne is saying, when I think about some of the technology, let's focus on what capability we are trying to drive to. A perfect example is we'll use a structured database. Well, if you say I only want to use SQL, the question is going to become which version of it and how do we do that? So if we start thinking, what the end state looks like and what capabilities we want to be able to provide and have and leverage and use, that allows us to be able to, whittle down the conversation to what is available and what we can work towards and how we can build this in that well-architected framework manner. So rather than focusing specifically on, I want this technology, focusing on the capability it provides you is really going to be helpful as we start working through through an architectural design session.
Jim, so we've covered a lot. Wayne, all of the resources that you've been critical at helping people understand how to best prepare. The objective whenever we first broached this particular topic, not necessarily just comes back to the value proposition of what cloud brings to the table. It's how can you orient an existing maybe institutional infrastructure and position those folks to be prepared that it's going to be a little bit of a process. And I think that it's incredibly valuable to go back to the original point. The original intent was, how can those on this call, or how can those folks who are listening be best prepared to save themselves time and save, and have an adequate use of resources going through the onboarding phase, meaning they run into their respective brokers, and making sure that ADS prepares them for what the IATT process is going to consist of. So I think I want to jump forward here just real quick. Can you talk, either Jim or Wayne, talking a little bit about this particular slide and how we could help, it actually helps to add context to our respective DoD who are considering cloud in this, I guess, in this example.
Yeah, I'll take go for it, Jim. I'll follow on.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at this just with something that's really tangible. this map that we've got here kind of outlines where Microsoft is located and where the fiber runs are. And you might say, okay, well, I know that Azure Governance and Azure Secret are only hosted in CONUS, for example. But where this fiber and especially the POPs, the points of presence, are impactful is reducing latency to the users of your workload wherever they are. So, for example, if anybody's used Azure Virtual Desktop, either the implementation deployed by the Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever, if you're a user who's using that and you're sitting in Germany, for example, you don't have to ride native DoD networks to get back to that virtual desktop session. You're actually going into a point of presence in Munich or Frankfurt, and you're going through really fast, really available Microsoft fiber to be able to get back to those data centers in CONUS. So that's kind of what, in my opinion, really sets the scale of a cloud provider like Microsoft apart, is that you can, even in the DoD, you can latch onto a lot of these commercial circuits and do stuff that you would be otherwise unable to do.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add on to that is, when you look at the scale and you look at the size of this, and some of the numbers that we have at the bottom, Microsoft runs this stuff at scale. Like this is probably one of the biggest networks in the world, largest sets of data centers, services. We know how to do these things. And we do it for the largest customers in the world, and then obviously the largest, on the commercial side, as well as then, some of the largest MilDefs as well in the world as well. So, as you kind of think about the scale of what we have, it is pretty significant. And, we operate on a, a 30, 60, 90-day cadence now. It's no longer a cadence of, hey, every 3 years, or we wait for, every 5 years for a new product to drop, and then, oh, we'll wait for service 1 before we deploy. I mean, Microsoft is constantly kind of deploying new services into these environments. And so the way, it lands in commercial, and then ultimately makes its way from commercial over into gov, or into our gov regions. And then, from aisle 4, 5, and then ultimately up into 6. And so we've got, the full gamut of services that we're able to offer across these environments. The other thing that I would add is we're acutely aware of the need to kind of make sure that these things are running at the optimum levels. And so you'll see things like, hey, our DoD regions are being retired because our investments are going into gov regions, because that's where our newest technologies are being deployed. And so as we go through these architectures and these architecture design sessions, it's about kind of making sure that we surface some of these concerns up to say, hey, like, we want to make sure that we're in DoD. Well, actually, that region is going away. So if we kind of future-proof you, we want to put you into gov region, because that's kind of where the latest tech is going to be built, and so on and so forth. And so I think making sure that we understand some of those nuances around how do we continually evolve our data centers and keep them running for your requirements.
That's absolutely a great call out from both of y'all about that point and in the infrastructure that's supporting our customers here. So if you're watching this live, what I would suggest that you do is maybe screenshot this particular slide. The reason being is it's really good. Wayne came up with it. No, I'm teasing. The reason why you're going to want to do that is this is actually an example of something that Andrew had shared whenever Wayne was coming to a particular meeting. So what this is going to do is it's going to help organize some of the resources that he has put in the chat, and actually give you some additional bullet points that you can categorize how to structure some of your prep work for that time. So I know that we have about a minute left or so, and Kyle, if you want to drop that last question here, we want to talk through a little bit of next steps. But as you're filling out the questionnaire, I want to make sure that we leave Wayne and Jim here with a couple saved rounds. Anything that y'all have in terms of saved rounds that you want to add before we wrap? We'll go to you, Wayne, first, and then we'll go to Jim.
Well, I think just leverage some of those resources that we've dropped into the Iron Window. I think they're extremely valuable, extremely powerful. Feel free to reach out. You've got our email addresses. Happy to jump onto calls, have some of these conversations. It doesn't always have to be, a days long kind of set of sessions. We can do short, small bites, 30, 45 minutes at a time to kind of help move through some concepts. So we're agile and here to support. Go for it, Jim.
Yeah, just to echo that, use and abuse your Microsoft contacts. Microsoft pays us to make sure that you, the customer, is successful. So don't be strangers on any of this.
And if Jim, you want to drop your personal cell in there too, and that you like receiving calls about 5 o'clock or so on Friday, right? That's usually when you.
Yeah.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
No, I prefer
not gonna
about
do
5
that.
in the morning. 5 in the
Got
morning.
okay, got it. All right. We just need to know which way you do that. So no, I'm teasing. I want to say thank you very much to both Wayne and Jim for orienting the expectations on this particular topic. There's some ambiguity relative to the data products and the platform as a service products that Microsoft has the data and AI team focusing on, and how to use this time as an ADS is positioned to help connect those two dots. And I'm telling you, the information that you shared, Wayne and Jim, both completely just very invaluable. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to guest here on this. Andrew, I am going to jump to the next slide real quick. That way we can wrap. We can promote a little bit of the things that we have coming up. I know we talked about other events that we have coming up soon. The next steps question was exactly what Kyla had just shared. But anything else that you want to leave these folks with before we promote what's coming?
No. To echo, leverage the resources we've dropped in the chat, and hit us up. We can follow up with that information post session. But like Jim said, use and abuse us to help you kind of get the right resources. Come up with the folks that you want to have at the table, and let's schedule some time to do an Azure design session. I think this type of information we provided today is just kind of what a lot of people need to take that first step, right? I think there's a lot of questions around, but how do I get started, right? And I think we've kind of articulated that today and given you kind of some actual good information and next steps. So looking forward to everybody, our next discussions. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, fantastic. So absolutely. So we just put in the chat, there is a feedback form where you can tell, you can, comment about Zach's V-neck that he's wearing, or, Andrew's haircut, or, that type of thing. You may notice, a Dallas Cowboys picture behind me or something like that, and you want to talk about how they're going to win the NFC East this year. That's fine. No problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, we just want to talk about a little bit about what's coming. When you have somebody like Wayne or a Jim or some of the other folks who compile a lot of the resources here at Microsoft, sometimes it can kind of seem like it's overwhelming. So what our objective is with this particular series is to break it down into bite-sized chunks, make it a little bit more digestible, so we can give you bits and pieces of the proper context here on how to best position your mission. So we're actually going to have a lot of the content that we've been producing repurposed into a podcast. We're going to have quick hitting, smaller interviews outside of these series. You'll see some of the video content that's going to be there as well, just promoting some of these mission use cases and how our products dovetail in with that mission and how those things play nice together. So with that, what we're going to do is land the plane right here, which is click on the feedback form, let us know how we did, what we could have done more. And with that, I think we're very much wrapped. So Wayne, Jim, appreciate y'all. Thank you very much for your time. Hope y'all have a great rest of the day. Kyla, thank you for your help.
Thanks, team.
Thanks all.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Appreciate it, y'all.
Bye.
Have a great day.